Yeah, on.
Two twins. Yeah. Episode 46, Two Twins and an Album. Welcome, everybody. See, how you doing today? I am doing fabulously well. Very excited about today's guest on the old podcast here. Super excited. We're going to go back in time 17 years. We'll talk to our special guest about that because I cannot believe today's album came out 17 years ago. But we are thrilled, honored, excited, privileged to have joining us the list of credits is long for Sparta. Vocalist, guitarist. I know you do some keyboards, Jim. Songwriter, director of all things, headman, frontman, leader.
Thorn in the side.
Welcome, everybody. Jim Ward to Two Twins and an Album. Jim, it is awesome to have you join us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Jim, of course, your credits go beyond Sparta, and we'll get into that a little bit. But let's just talk a little bit about the last year. First and foremost, how are you doing? And how have you navigated through this really drama-free 2020? I mean, not much has happened, right? I mean, it's kind of been uneventful.
Yeah. Just kind of same old.
How is it being off the road? You know, we've had a couple musicians join us that have had to, be on the sidelines for the last year and 2 months. Obviously, you've been very busy in other ways, which we'll get to. But talk a little bit about, just what it's been like to sort of be sitting still for this long.
So I actually, at the end of the Threes record, the Sparta record Threes, I sort of went off the full-time circuit, and I did a side band I have called Sleepercar, which was a bunch of like really old school touring where it's just like me and the dudes in a band and like sleeping at people's houses. And I sort of needed a reset. I was just pretty burned out at the end of Threes, sort of the full staff burnout, like where I just needed to take it back. And then when I was done with the Sleepercar tour, I sort of just stayed home for a while, and I just decided to not make my living on the road anymore. So I started some things in El Paso with my wife and some friends, and, sort of reinvented myself for a good number of years, and then would sort of tour here and there a little bit. But then in 2018, sort of fired up Sparta again, made a record in 2019. It was supposed to, it came out in April of 2020, and there was a pretty massive list of shows to be announced and then canceled and then postponed and then announced and canceled. And then, and then just like everybody, the train went off the track. And that's where I was in August of 2020. And that's what made this record, the new record.
I have to thank you personally because 2020 was such a shit year, but one of the good days was Sparta has a new album out. We're in Southeast Michigan, and that was during a time where we were pretty well shut in. And I spent a lot of time just digging into Trust the River, and it was a bright spot in an otherwise really crappy time period for us. So
thank you.
It's just really, really cool to have Sparta back, and albeit in a little different formation and personnel, obviously, than the album that we'll look at tonight, which is 2004's Porcelain. But I managed to check you guys out. You played a smashing gig at the Blind Pig in Ann Arbor.
Oh yeah, you were there. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was there, and what a great night. It looked like you're really enjoying this new lineup, and you're kind of back to the basics. And even to play the Blind Pig is a very cool venue for you guys to be at.
I had a super good time. That day we walked from the Blind Pig about, a mile and a half, 2 miles to a brewery, to a brew pub. Me and my wife, Christine, and Matt Miller, we all walked up there and had a beer. And I think we took a car back because we were lazy, but that's the stuff that I missed. That's the stuff that I missed when you're sort of full-time, full-blown craziness, and there's 50 salaries that you got to worry about, et cetera, et cetera. And what I like to do is play music and have a good time and meet people and hang out. And, I love little rooms. That's where, if I could be all the time and make a living, then I probably would do that, which is what we're trying to work on now, which is just building multiple days in cities. And instead of trying to max out every city every day, I'm like, what? I want to spend 3 nights in San Francisco. So put me in the room that I could sell 3 nights in. And that way I can go see my friends and eat breakfast and go see bookstores and, do the stuff that I want to do. Also, that show was the worst hotel experience of the entire tour because I like to book on the fly. So I don't like to have like a huge plan. And this is the problem when you play with me is that I don't have much of a plan other than we're going to be in Ann Arbor. And then, the next day we're going to be somewhere else. So in between that, we'll sleep somewhere. I didn't realize that was like the first football game of the year that night.
Yes, it was in the fall. That's right.
Yeah.
So I was like going through hotel and I was like to the point where I was like, I will spend any amount of money. I don't care. And we ended up in just the Bates Motel of Ann Arbor. It was awful, super awful. And I just remember like, we're not super snobby dudes by any means, but like checking in and then looking behind me at the rest of the dudes and cause my wife travels with me, like looking back at them and everyone was just like, oh, we're going to fucking kill you.
Was there like a sign outside that said like, we have color TV, one of those type of places?
It said we have phones.
That's
Well, Jim, here's the beauty of it. Next time you come, all you gotta do is call T or I. You can crash in our garage. Now you got a constant place to crash when you're in Michigan.
And now I know.
Absolutely. And so right in the midst of all this, Jim, too, again, great news in a weird time, a Jim Ward solo album. And that honestly hit me a little bit out of nowhere because I figured you guys would have still been kind of in Trust the River mode, but got to check out Paper Fish and man, what a song. I have to admit, when I heard about your solo record, I expected something kind of, stripped down, acoustic, like kind of that rustic sort of thing. And I tuned in and immediately was like, whoa, Jim's rocking out on this new solo effort.
And that is not the heaviest song on the record by any means. So the next single comes out next Friday or next Thursday, and it is a banger. So I think part of this was a surprise to me as well. Generally, this was a record that I made to make myself feel comfortable in a time when I didn't feel comfortable. And it wasn't intended. It was just me writing songs really quickly. Like I wrote the record in probably 13 or 14 days. Tucker did all the drum demos in like 3 days. It just happened really, really fast.
When is it? What's the next single called? And when's it going to come out?
It's called I Got a Secret. And Shauna Potter from War on Women. I don't know if you're familiar with that band, but it's...
Oh, nice.
She sings. It's basically a duet. It's like a call and response, but it was the first song I wrote for the record. And it's just full blown big guitar, fast craziness, screaming. For a lot of the fans that were a little like, Trust the River's not heavy enough, or like, why are you in your 40s now? Like, I think maybe this will be a little bit of a slapback at that.
How dare you turn 40, Jim?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always say like, I don't make records for anybody else. So I'm fine with criticism. I'm not hurt by it necessarily, or like, I don't want people to think a certain thing about the music that I make, but I do always find it funny when people tell me I'm wrong in what I do, because it's silly.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, before we get too far into it, how do you feel about looking back? As artists, we're all people who like to look forward, right? I mean, we always hesitate to ask an artist, especially one like yourself, who always moves forward, about the process of looking back at an album that's almost 2 decades old. How do you feel about doing that sort of thing as an artist?
I think there's just a lot of different, like anything, there's a huge spectrum of how you treat your past. Like some people bury it, some people change it, some people rewrite history, some people live in the past. There's always the stories of like the high school quarterback who can't let it go. And I think sort of taking bits of all of that is pretty healthy. So we try and figure out, I came from a band that was basically done by the time I was 24, that has left a huge impression or shadow sometimes, or sometimes it's a bright light. So at a young age, I started sort of figuring out how to deal with my past, because one, every interview I do for the rest of my life will ask me about it. And I can either be a jerk or lie, or I could just sort of be honest and deal with it as I go. And what I found is after talking about it for 20 years, I'm pretty good with it. Like, so I'm pretty good looking at the past and saying like, there was some great stuff that happened. I know we're talking about Porcelain today. Like there's some great stuff that happened in my life around then. There was also some awful things that happened, and sort of all of that went into the record. And I would be remiss to not acknowledge all of that, And then also on top of that, that record sits in people's lives in that time period and whenever they sort of discovered it. And I respect that. And I don't try and tell people what to think about it. It's yours. Once I make it and give it to the world, it's up to you. You do what you want with it. Just don't tell me I'm wrong. That's all.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, you've had a fascinating career, obviously, from the get-go. And, one of the things that I think many are interested in, I certainly am, is, going all the way back to kind of the early El Paso days. I mean, first of all, we're up in Michigan, and most of us are pretty unfamiliar with just El Paso as a town, as a community, as a culture, particularly when it comes to arts and music and those type of things. Clearly you guys, we're going back a ways now with the kind of creation and execution of At the Drive-In. And what was the scene like at that time locally? And has it changed much? Obviously you guys had a pretty big impact on it, I would imagine. Did you guys kind of know at the time that you were doing something unique and special? Or were you just jamming and doing what you do? Because it's a really interesting project in hindsight to look back at, and one that pretty influential, very acclaimed. Was your head spinning? Did you know you were a part of something that was different and unique, or what was it like looking back?
So I think there's sort of two elements to the beginning of the story. One is I was a senior in high school. I didn't want to go to college. The band that I was playing in, I was the frontman. I was the singer guitar player for a band. The bass player was older than me and already in school and established and was paying rent, and he didn't want to tour. And I understand now. At the time I couldn't understand. And I didn't talk to him for a long time afterwards. I wanted to tour, and I knew that Cedric was the best frontman in our town, and I wanted to make a band with him. So we started the band, and then we filled it out with some guys that we didn't really know. The drummer for my band eventually ended up being the drummer on the first 7-inch, and then we had a lot of people come through that band. There's been like 150 members of that band. So it was really the idea that I wanted to explore the world. And I felt like because I was watching bands come through El Paso, I knew that was a possibility, that you could be a band from Washington, D.C. and be playing in El Paso. So why couldn't you be a band from El Paso and be playing in Washington, D.C.? Also, the Rhythm Pigs are from El Paso. So we sort of had a blueprint and an older brother in Ed Ivy who would kind of school us on this is how it works. So pretty much immediately it was like, write some songs, make a 7-inch, do 4 Texas shows, and then book a summer tour in 95. And that to me was like the nail in the coffin. Like I never wanted to do anything else. I was hooked. Never realized it would be important to anybody else. Didn't think that would, like, there was never a goal of being rich or famous or anything. It was very much a DIY punk rock band. But it had a lot of personalities, and sort of every evolution of the band, kept getting bigger and better and more complicated, which I think was a good thing up until the point that it kept us from being able to work anymore. It's obviously, and I don't know if you know the whole history, but I was actually kicked out of the band 3 weeks before the 2016 reunion. So I was at the first round of practicing, got kicked out, didn't do that tour, didn't make that record. And was replaced by Keeley, who was in Sparta, who replaced Paul, who went to, you know what I mean? Like, we're a very complicated group of dudes. It is like, It is like a middle school TV show. You
need one of those family trees like Yes has, where it's like all these different formations and everything. Yeah.
It's super complicated, and it would be easy to be upset and sort of put all of that stuff into a box and make it about one thing. Yeah. But this is what I'm talking about, where you look back on your whole career and you say, I left the band before they made the EP El Gran Orgo. I left the band because my memory of it is, if I don't quit, this band's going to break up, because there was a guy who was going to join that didn't like me, who was Tony, who then went to be the drummer in Sparta, and we did tons of records together. But at that moment in our lives, we couldn't connect. We couldn't make music together. And I felt like if I don't leave, this band's just going to break up, and they're just going to be the same band with a new drummer and a different name. And again, this is my memory of it. So I don't know, maybe their memory is different, but I felt like the right thing to do, because I love the band, was to leave. And I think what happened in 2016 is similar. Like, I love that band. I wouldn't, despite all of the people that encouraged me to take sort of legal action or whatever, or talk shit about it. Mm-hmm. I said, no, man, I love that band. The stuff that's happening with me, inside me, and I'm going to process for a long time, that doesn't have anything to do with kids going to a show and seeing a band. So I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna tarnish that. I'm not gonna talk shit about anybody. I'm not gonna do interviews and fight back about whatever is said. Like, it just doesn't, it's not important. What's important to me is that something that was a desire for me in 1994, which was, I want to create and escape this future that I'm supposed to go into. You know, I was like, I did well in school. I should have gone to college. I was in engineering camps and shit like that in high school. Mm-hmm. That's not the path I want to go on. I want to go on this path. And when I go on this path, I don't want at any point to look back at that and rewrite that history and say, you know, it wasn't really that important. What's more important is what I'm doing now. Like, that's not true. It's just not fucking true. Yeah. So I just kind of leave it at that. Long answer to the question. But yeah, the thing about El Paso, I'll tell you this, is that in 1994, every band would play with every band because there weren't enough bands to have subgenres. So there wasn't like a ska scene and a punk scene and a metal scene. It was like, we just had a scene. And everybody played shows together. And so you would play a show and you would watch your friend who was in a super metal band play, and then your friend that was in a band that sounded like 10,000 Maniacs. And then, you know what I mean? We all played together because that was the only option. Yeah. And I'm assuming that that's happening all over the world because there's only a few cities where you could have 50 garage bands, you know?
Totally. And, you know, you guys were pretty original. I mean, I'm sure there were some bands around that were kind of producing that sort of sound, but I think all in all, you were presenting yourselves, you were performing, and you were creating sort of a genre of content that was unfamiliar to many and very original. What kind of stuff were you into back then as you were, you know, kind of formulating this, what at the time was a pretty new, I think, approach? You know, who kind of influenced that, either for you or for kind of the band as a whole? I mean, were there specific things that you were really diving into at the time?
Well, I think there was a very democratic writing process between Cedric and I, who started writing together and wrote probably the bulk of stuff in the beginning. And the process was, hey, I have this riff. Cool. I have one. We can put it together. You know, it wasn't all of the songwriting for that band forever, no matter who did what, was split equally. All the money that was made forever was split equally. It was never anything other than a democratic rock and roll band. I was definitely biting Drive Like Jehu pretty fucking hard. I was definitely biting Nation of Ulysses pretty hard. But at the same time, I really love U2. So there's like, for me, there's this thing going on where I want the Edge's melody, but I want the ferocious guitar of Drive Like Jehu. And then on top of that, I want the aesthetic of Nation of Ulysses. Like, I like this whole invention of yourself. Like, I wasn't a cool kid in school. Like, I wanted to reinvent myself like every rock and roll kid.
Sure.
And all of that was rolled up in the ball of punk rock, which has very, very few rules, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, you can't be that. It's more like, you do whatever you want. Who cares? You know?
Yeah.
And then we'll judge you. I'm not saying there's no judgment in punk rock. I'm just saying there's very few preconceived, like, do what you want and then we'll make fun of you. But yeah, it's not like it's a feel good place all the time.
You know? Yeah. And at the time where you guys, you know, back when you guys kind of went different directions, I mean, were there a lot of creative differences at the time? I mean, obviously we know where they went with Mars Volta and we know where you went with Sparta, and clearly those are two pretty different things. Was that creating any sort of disagreement creatively around that time? And I'm curious, you know, when obviously we're going to talk about Porcelain, just a fantastic record, you know, you're kind of doing that, which was certainly a different sounding rock record, but it's a rock record. Mm-hmm. And then you're seeing those guys kind of doing some of the crazy stuff there. I mean, did you think it was cool? Were you like, what the hell are they doing? Or did it all did it make sense? Was it like, yeah, we clearly wanted to do some different things? And
there wasn't really ever a creative time period after we finished Relationship, which was done in March of 2000. Mm-hmm. Once the record was done, we essentially went on tour and just burned ourselves out. I was home 21 days in the year 2000.
Wow.
And we basically broke up on March 18th of 2001. So we only existed for a year after that record was kind of done. And that record was written really quickly before we made it. So all of that stuff is a blur. And making the record wasn't a challenge. There wasn't a lot of creative differences. I think it honestly probably in hindsight had a lot more to do with outside factors, not necessarily creating music, but maybe who's in charge of what, or the vision for the future, and a lot of probably preconceived notions of, well, I want to do this, but they don't want to. Okay. I don't remember that ever being an issue, but at the same time, this is my memory, and I'm pretty clueless a lot of the times when it comes to the politics of what's going on in the band.
Yeah,
I pretty much sit in the middle. Clear, yeah. Like I'm rarely I'm rarely like demanding anything, but at the same time, I'm not really creating. I'm not causing situations either. Like
low drama. It sounds like
low drama. But also, like, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. It's not like you can really sum it up. I'm a headstrong person. I'm definitely an alpha writer. So I think probably if I'm writing a ton of stuff and someone isn't happy with it, they don't always tell me I'm not happy with it. Maybe they just want to do a new band, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Yeah. I wouldn't want someone to be. I'm never going to be in a band where I'm not at least one of the primary writers, because that's my job. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not the world's greatest frontman. I'm a great sideman because I'm a pretty good frontman, which makes me fit that role, really well. But like, I like the Joe Strummer role of a band.
Yeah.
Those are kind of my heroes. Like all the guys that I look up to musically, like guys and gals would be sort of I don't always love the rock star. I kind of love the rock star sideman a little bit. And with, of course, exceptions. But that's kind of, I don't think that there'll ever be an easy way to explain any of that stuff. Looking back on it, I wouldn't change anything. As crazy as my life has been, I also have friends that have been in the same band since they were 19, and they're equally as happy and as unhappy as I am. So I don't know that there's one way or the other that's better. It's just the way that my life has turned out, and what a fucking life. I'm not complaining.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's good, that you're kind of a low drama type of dynamic within a group. Cause I mean, Cedric and Omar don't seem drama at all, just not at all. So
I think this is also, this would be probably one of those things where it's all in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
There's probably definitely people I've played with that are like, that dude is nonstop drama. Like, to some degree, self-preservation includes letting yourself off the hook more than other people would, right? Yeah. So I'm not the sort of person that's going to say. In fact, I tend to lean towards self-deprecation more than whatever. But at the end of the day, I try to be honest as I can be, and I also try to admit when I don't know, or leave room for you to make that decision. Like, I don't know that I'm the easiest person to play with. In fact, I know I'm not the easiest person to play with. But it is what it is, and.
Well, that genuine nature really, really comes through in your work and in your art. And it certainly does, I think, in tonight's album. So
it's one of my favorite things about Sparta and about Porcelain is just the authenticity. And we'll get to that for sure. We cannot wait to put this album on the turntable. But before we do that, T, let's figure out what Jim Ward has been listening to as we take the show round and round. T, let's do it. Top 3 albums that have been suiting your musical fancy of late. What do you got?
All right. Well, as usual, I got 3 pretty different things. The first, I'm finally, this is after months, digging into I guess it's not a new record anymore, but it's the most recent from one of my favorite bands out of the UK called Everything Everything. And this is, I guess I've used this term that completely, fabricated and invented called prog pop, which I think is kind of what these guys are. Very creative, a lot of odd time signature stuff, unique vocal. They're an awesome band, and I'm finally kind of starting to get into their record top to bottom, even though it took me a few months. So I've been plowing through that one from one of my favorite newer bands out there. The second is a little Howard Jones. And this is his live acoustic, which for him, acoustic is himself and a piano. And there's some really good versions of some of his classic work. Big fan. And the third, listen, I've been wondering if Snow, the guy who did Informer, I've been wondering if 12 Inches of Snow, which might be the best album title ever.
Phenomenal.
is actually a good record. So I gave 12 Inches of Snow a couple spins. It's not great. It's not great, but kind of amazing at the same time. So I got to give it up to my man Snow, 12 Inches of. So that's what's been round and round for me. How about you, Nub?
Well, actually, let's kick it to our special guest, Jim Ward. Jim, what have you been listening to 3 albums of late?
So I'm going to go first off just with a single. The new Quicksand single, I think, is great. And talking about a band that can appear, disappear, reappear, and be equally as hard hitting.
Yeah.
So been enjoying Inversion. I've gone back to one of my favorite records ever, which is Cancel Everything by Ronnie Wood. Again, talking about my love of sidemen. Cancel Everything has a song called Mystifies Me on it, which do yourself a favor and listen to that song. And just, it is so unbelievably good that I will always kind of go back to it from time to time. And I think through this time period, I sort of have gone back to records that bring me comfort and joy, you know? And then the last one I'd say is I just got my copy of Assembly, the Joe Strummer retrospective LP. So I've been just kind of like burning through some of that stuff. Like I Fought the Law Live, Coma Girl studio version, stuff like that. And just falling in love again.
Nice.
That's good stuff, Jim. That good call on the Quicksand. I haven't heard it yet. See, I don't know if you've checked it out. We're very Quicksand friendly here on the podcast. Yeah.
So it's so good.
Looking forward to it. For me, I've got first and foremost, and Jim, in the last week's podcast that we did, I've recently rediscovered a band from the 90s. I wouldn't say discovered, but it's a band called Big Wreck. And they're sort of a prog band. Yeah. And I've been digging their second album, which is The Pleasure and the Greed. And it's cool to just completely discover a band that's from that era that literally I had no idea even existed, and been really enjoying that. Second would be Meshuggah, getting my metal on with their first album, Contradictions Collapse. Jim Ward, is Meshuggah too metal for you, or can you dig that sort of thing?
There's nothing too metal for me.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
I don't put those barriers up, man.
Love it. And third would be Joni Mitchell's Ladies of the King. And she's actually, there's a reissue package coming out of the first 4 albums.
That's a little too metal for me. I don't know.
yeah, Joni Mitchell too metal for you too. Yeah. This is the 1970 album, and I'm listening to it now because I'm definitely going to buy this reissue vinyl box set that's coming out, which includes this album in it. But those first few Joni Mitchell albums were just insanely good.
I hadn't, I don't know if they're airing it on the radio because the box set's coming out or whatever, but they were playing, what's it called? Not Big Car. What's the song about the parking lot?
Big Yellow Taxi.
Big Yellow Taxi.
It's just the parking lot song, right?
Yeah. But I never really realized the end of that when she's like sort of goofing on the vocal, where she's doing like the real high and the real low and then kind of laughs at herself. Like I think always thought that was live, but that's actually the recorded version is pretty amazing. Like I love the last 5 seconds of that song. It's unreal.
Totally. And based on, I don't know if you watched that Echoes of the Canyon documentary, but I'm imagining there were some substances involved in that particular session. Cause you're right, man. It's like, how is she doing this?
No, not at all.
Never. Well, Porcelain from 2004 is the album of focus on episode 46. And we talked a lot already about kind of the deep background of the record. But Jim, let's get into some of the just kind of background information about it before we drop the needle. So let's take Porcelain into what we call the nerdy deets done dirt cheap.
You want some dirty deeds? Yeah. You want some dirty deeds?
Porcelain was released July 13th of 2004. Jim, the album's about to turn 17. How crazy is that?
Now it's one year from legal.
What's very significant about this album is it came out on Geffen Records, and not just a major label, but one of the major labels, and a label that's so synonymous with taking chances and doing things just a little bit against the grain. And we'll talk a little bit about just the role of the major label in this album. I think that does play into the sound. The album was produced by Mike Major. It is an exceptionally sounding album when you just look at the production. 2004 was a very unique era in music. This is that sort of switch from people sort of buying and holding music to, downloading and listening to things more on portable devices. But this album feels like it was produced, mixed, and mastered for radio, which is a lost art now because, radio is a totally different medium than it was then. But it definitely is that major label polish. Jim, tell me a little bit about just Mike Major's impact on it and just this idea of being on one of the giants of all major record labels.
So two funny things about that. Mike Major is the first person I ever went to a studio with when we recorded the first 7-inch at the drive-in. So he was an engineer in El Paso at kind of our one real studio that we could afford, at least. So all of my studio etiquette came from working with Mike, who's probably 10 years older than me, something like that. So I was 17 in the studio and he's telling me, you don't do that in a studio. You do this. You don't do that. You do this. You treat it with respect. So we've always been complimented on our studio etiquette because of Mike. Like we treat all of this stuff with respect, and being able to have him come back and make a major label record for us, with us, not for us, was huge. He brought his family out. We lived in LA together. All of us that were from El Paso lived in LA at the same time, lived at a, corporate apartments or whatever, but it just had a different sort of get out of town, do what you do to the 10th degree. Like it was taken so seriously. We brought an engineer from El Paso. We brought our producer from El Paso. Like we went to Sunset Sound and made a record in a holy place to us. We wrote that record in Joshua Tree at Rancho de la Luna, which is sort of the Queen's compound, with Josh's blessing. All of those things kind of were really important. I had lost a couple of really critical people in my life right before we started writing that record, right at the end of Wiretap. The other thing to remember is that going into writing this record, we had been essentially on tour for 6 years, something like that. So it was basically the last two At the Drive-In records and Wiretap. All of that stuff had been in sequence. There was no breaks. There was no vacations. So we're still kind of learning how to be grown-ups and writing this record and going into your sophomore record, which is a really hard place to go anyway. And then
you were a really young band. A lot of people don't realize that because they associate the At the Drive-In thing. But
right,
Wiretap came out pretty quickly, and you were able to release. Were you on DreamWorks for Wiretap?
Yeah, we were actually on DreamWorks halfway through Porcelain too.
Okay. So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. DreamWorks got bought by Geffen while we were at Sunset Sound, and basically somebody called and said, DreamWorks is dissolving into Geffen. They're keeping half the roster. We'll let you know tomorrow where you're at. Something to that effect. And it was probably less concerning than it should have been for me in particular. Like I was just like, whatever. I mean, what are you going to do? We're making a record, and I'd rather just kind of go out and have fun tonight than worry about this stuff. But we ended up we got kept, but we were always sort of the bastard child. And I don't think we ever got a real fair shot. I don't think Porcelain ever got its fair shot at the world because a whole staff inherited a half finished record. And it just, even though our A&R guy went to Geffen, I don't know that we ever had the full support of the label.
And plus, Jim, the labels were panicking because this was literally the beginning of them bleeding money because they weren't selling like they were, and this threat of digital and everything. I mean,
and we weren't a big seller to begin with. Like Wiretap sold a lot of records, but the other people on Geffen at that time were like 50 Cent, who was selling a lot of records. So I think it's just the time period, and I've never taken it personally. And I got some pretty good friends out of that deal that worked at that label, and but yeah, that's kind of the setup.
The album peaked at number 60 on the Billboard 200, so charted well. The first and I believe only single was "Breaking the Broken," which did fairly well and got some play on rock radio and things like that. I know the video is still something I check out every once in a while because I love that accompanying video that went with it. The personnel, as we sort of referenced, is of course tonight's guest, Jim Ward on guitars and vocals. Jim, I'm assuming you did some of the keyboard work. I know in like La Sera, I can hear some of those deep keyboards. Did you play those, or was that Mike Major? Or
Yeah, no, I do all the pianos.
That's what I thought. Okay, cool. Yeah. And then, you know what? I've always, I think, butchered his name. Is it Paul Hingos? Is that how you pronounce it?
It's Hinojos.
Hinojos. Okay, cool. So Paul Hinojos, which is obviously one of the carryover members from At the Drive-In on guitar. We'll talk a lot about the two of you and your dual guitar attack because it's a pretty special part of Porcelain. Matt Miller, who's still in Sparta, which is great, on bass. And then one of the secret weapons of the band during this phase, in my opinion, which is Tony Hajar. Yes, I'm a drummer, so I'm a little partial, but I think the guy just slams. And I think he brought something to Sparta that was that gave you guys such a big sound.
Yeah. You also have to remember that Mike Major is a drummer. That is always like a cornerstone it should be a cornerstone for any record, but a lot of that pre-production. And I think Tony and Mike still have a really great relationship. And I think that that's, one thing that benefited from their relationship was like, I mean, there's a fucking drum solo on the record. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And I think that says it all.
Where did you guys find Mad? I mean, is it
He's an El Paso guy. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So he's part of this whole scene.
Yeah.
And is it too simple to think that the break, I know Toph mentioned this earlier, but the break off with you, Tony, and Paul, were you guys just on the same page from the beginning and knew that you wanted a certain sound? Was it a natural break to have you three be in the band together, or was there still an adjustment period when Sparta started, or were you guys pretty well set on playing with each other? And
it's hard to imagine now because it happened. What in hindsight, it looks like it happened so quickly. But when we stopped, it wasn't unusual for us to play in other bands. I played in several bands at the drive. We all had other bands, so it wasn't like it wasn't weird to immediately go off. I went immediately to Austin and started playing with the guys that were in a band called Rhythm of Black Lines. And I can't find it, but there's a recording of Air that I did with them before Sparta ever started. I came home from that sort of hangout session, etc. And they sort of just pulled me into basically a meeting or a bar or whatever it was, and just said like, look, I'll remember the way I remember it is they were like, we've been watching tapes of old shows and your singing is strong. Why don't you be a singer in a band? And I think it, to some degree, this is where you get into like revisionism. I can't tell you why I chose to do that instead of playing with the guys in Austin. But looking back, to me, it seemed like my friends needed me. And I'm not putting not that I saved anybody or not, don't take that in the wrong way. I just think at the time they were like, hey, we could do this together. And it felt like, okay, like this is where I need to be. And also that was my first real record singing. I mean, I sang in high school in a high school band, right? But never at this level. Like I signed to DreamWorks as an unproven singer, like for a stupid amount of money at the time, like I don't know why they did that. And I took that pressure really seriously. And in fact, when we made Wiretap Scars, I told Jerry Finn that I wouldn't use auto-tune. And he said, that's fine, but I'm going to work you to the bone. And I worked on vocals for like 2 months, like a ridiculous amount of time, and a ridiculous amount of money was spent on me learning how to sing in the studio. So like what you hear on Wiretap Scars is there's no computer correction at all. That is me working my fucking ass off. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's what it took at the time. So I think going into Porcelain, I sort of had all of those. We toured for 18, 19 months on Wiretap. So going into Porcelain, things were disheveled to say the least. We had lost my cousin, who was an integral part of sort of all of our crews, and something that kind of kept our camps tied together a little bit. My grandfather died. My grandfather died while we were on tour. And then our good friend Ray passed away from cancer. And then my cousin died, all within like 7 weeks of each other. So going into write Porcelain, I was not in good shape, like is the easiest way to say it.
And then of course, you make the record, have to go on tour. And I mean, that couldn't have been easy. And in fact, you guys sort of, halted the tour at some point during it while you were on Porcelain.
Yeah, I left because here's another thing. And I'm kind of, whether it's a good part of the story or not for Porcelain, is that was the end of my rope. So that was, I went as far as I could go, and we played at the Chameleon Club in Lancaster. And I woke up the next morning and basically was, we didn't talk about mental health. We didn't talk about the health of the band at that point. It was just like, I was sent to throat specialists because I was spitting up blood, but no one ever said, hey man, you're not doing so good, like mentally. Yeah. And it was kind of up, and it's nobody else's job. I get that part. I mean, there's a lot of people that made a lot of fucking money off us that didn't say, you seem a little bit fucked up. But again, that's what it is. I woke up and knew immediately that I either needed to kill myself or leave the tour. And that's a fucked up thing to say, but that's how far I got. And I looked in my phone all morning. Like I woke up at like 4 a.m. and I looked in my phone all morning to see who I could call in my phone that would make me feel better enough to finish the tour. We were pretty as far away from LA as you can get. All those guys live in LA. I fucked up everybody's life, everybody's money, all the opening bands, all of the crew, because I got up and I went to my tour manager's room and I said, you need to put me on a plane like right fucking now. And I need to go home. And I turned off my phone and I didn't talk to anybody for weeks and weeks. And I just sat at home and started trying to figure out who I was and what had happened. And it's crazy. The thing that started all of that is that somebody walked up to me at the bar at the club and said, your music saved my life. And it's not like I've never heard that before. That's a common thing to tell people in bands. But that day I couldn't get it out of my head. While we were playing, I remember singing on autopilot, playing on autopilot, and thinking to myself, who is doing that for me? Because I fucking need that right now. Like, I need somebody to help me.
Yeah.
But we never talked about it.
Yeah.
Nobody ever talked about it. It was never like, you don't sit in the dressing room and say like, hey man, you seem a little down. It's just like, why are you bummed out?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Snap out of it. Toughen up.
Yeah. Get it together, man. You're so lucky. You know how many people would kill to be doing this? Like, it's just, that's the stuff and then you start watching your heroes do it to themselves and it starts to make sense, but.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, you use the term autopilot. I mean, I think, and Nub said it well on an episode a couple weeks ago, there's a lot of illusion, when it comes to rock and roll, as far as people go to the show and they think it's your only show, and it's just for them. And they don't realize the process of getting back on the tour bus, going to another hotel, maybe the shitty one in Ann Arbor, perhaps. Right. Yeah. It's, having never been a touring musician, I can only imagine the way that sometimes it can be frustrating to the point where everybody thinks that you're, just doing it for them that night and doesn't realize the taxation physically and mentally of kind of doing that. And listen, it's a job. We all have to, we have day jobs. We do sort of the corporate thing day to day. And there are days and there are weeks and there are months in some cases where it's just like, I can't do it. I don't want to do it, and people forget that for you guys, I'm sure you love, and have fond memories of While Oceana Sleeps. But, when you play it 200 times, you're working.
Yeah, for sure.
You're working. And that doesn't take anything away from the creativity of it or the process of it. Or I'm sure there's an element of you get joy from the joy that it brings others, but it's still work. And when those things become a grind and become work, it's not as easy as saying, man, you're a touring rock star, like, quit bitching.
Yeah. Nobody loves a bellyaching rock star like Ben Folds. Well, that's one of my favorite lines.
Yeah.
It's true. And it's hard work sometimes and it's super rewarding, but I've always said this. I've said this from when at the Drive and Stop the first time, and everyone said, how can you pull the plug on something that's about to be this big? And my answer is always, there's not enough money in the world to do this if you're unhappy.
Yep.
There's just not. It just doesn't matter. It's so taxing. To do it takes so much love to do it that there's no way anything else could replace that. Like, that's how much I love to play music, is that I do this. And that's the only way I could ever say it. So yeah, it's hard, but it's unbelievably rewarding. I've had an unbelievable fucking life. And I'm so grateful for everybody who has allowed me to have this life, but I don't want to ruin it and make it cheap for you either. Like, yeah, it's no good.
Well, that's one of the, I do want to mention, before we dig in to the record, that my first, Sparta show was on this tour. It was Nubs. Was it Clutch Cargoes or St. Andrews?
Clutch Cargoes.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I thought. In Pontiac, which no longer exists, and Pontiac's a ghost town, which kind of is sad.
That sucks.
But the thing and I've always said this about your band and about you, we've been to a lot of shows. You can tell we're kind of geeks about this whole thing, and the Sparta show was really special for me. And I didn't know a lot about the band. Nubs was really into it, and he kind of said, "You got to come see these guys," and I was like, "Yeah." And I'm sure glad I did, obviously. But the thing I remember is it was as like efficient of a crowd as I've ever seen. It wasn't a huge, massive crowd. The place was about 3/4 full, but every single person there knew the material, knew the lyrics. They were connecting. I remember this girl was standing like two people away from us. And I've never seen, I've seen a lot of people mouth along with lyrics and air drum, and I've never seen somebody be so connected to what was going on as this crowd. I always remember it's like this weird Citizen Kane thing where it's like the women, I'll always kind of remember her when I think of rock and roll shows. But it was a special thing. And to your point about people coming up to you and saying, how much your music meant to them and all those. And I'm sure at some point that, you start to hear that a few times, and I'm sure it never gets old, but it certainly gets routine. But I've been to very few shows. I could think of very few that were where you're standing in the midst of something where people, feel so connected and where, not just a heavy majority of the crowd, but all of the crowd seemed to be in that place. And that's what I'll always remember about that Clutch Cargo show, which was my, first experience in kind of seeing you guys live.
Well, I'll always go for the quality over the quantity. Always. I mean, for anything. And I think that we as a band, every band I've ever been in, everything I've ever done musically, like I've always left it on the floor. Always. Like there's very few times I can remember phoning it in at any point. Yeah. At any point. And I mean, like maybe the encore song at a festival, I'm like, I'm drunk. I'm fucking done. Nobody wants to see this. Like, but those are very rare. I mean, I'm talking like a few times I can literally remember. Most of the time it's just like all out all the time, as much as you can go. So I appreciate that it made that connection. That means a lot to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to share my favorite memory from that show when we get to the opening track of this album, because that plays a role in it. But the last nerdy deed I want to ask about, Jim, allow me to gush just a little bit about the sleeve and the imagery of Porcelain. There was something about this cover that connected with me, and I was reviewing music at the time. So I got my little promo version of Sparta, and just to prove I'm OG, Jim, I got the vinyl too.
Nice.
This is pretty rare too. But the all white, the use of my bird knowledge is not what it should be. Is it a swan?
It's a swan.
Swan. Okay. There's the simplicity of it. There's something beautiful about it. The album name to me is just something very pure and very simple and direct. I just love the whole package of it. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was the vision there?
It was all about being unassuming, not making anything crazy or over the top or overstimulating. It was about having like a palate cleanser, right? So it's a pretty honest record. And I just wanted an honest visual element to it. It was clean without being the White Album, which is what, somebody got to us before that.
Well, you could have also gone, I mean, if you wanted to, you could have gone Spinal Tap, a Black Swan, Black Album. I mean,
or just Shit Sandwich.
A 2-word review. Yeah.
Just straight to that.
2-word review. Yeah, exactly. Excellent. Well, those are the nerdy deets, and it's time to drop that needle. And I'm looking forward to the way Porcelain opens. So let's drop the needle on track 1 as we get into 2004's Porcelain. T, let's do this. When the drum beats go like this. If you looked up in the dictionary what a good rock album opener should sound like, you might find the opening track, Guns of Memorial Park. It's a jam. I said I'd talk about my favorite memory of the Clutch Cargo show, and here's what it is. I saw you guys on the first leg of Porcelain when you were opening for Incubus. Mm-hmm. It was at the Palace of Auburn Hills, big basketball arena. It's where the Detroit Pistons used to play.
First arena I ever played.
Is that right?
Yeah, with Rage. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. Nice. And it was really cool because I was super into the band and hadn't seen you guys yet. So it was cool. And if you remember during that leg, you were opening with Mai.
Why would we do that?
I was just about to say, interesting opener.
That's a terrible idea.
But I'll tell you what, it brought on analysis because I was like, well, this is an interesting choice because I was a fan of Wiretap and I thought for sure maybe Cut Your Ribbon or something, but there was something interesting though about that as a show.
I don't take any credit for that. Tony did set lists forever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I never did them.
Well, I desperately wanted you guys to open with Guns of Memorial Park. And when you announced your headlining tour, Clutch Cargoes, I was like, please just let them come out and just kick some serious ass with that as an opener. And you did. And it just got the show off. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it got the show off. It was a blistering version of it. It was just fantastic. And so that's one thing I remember is going from that kind of mid-tempo, interesting choice of Mai to Guns of Memorial Park. But talk about this as the kickoff, and it sure grabs the attention right off the bat.
So I always think it's I used to like to tell people sort of, I like to live in the world between Fugazi and Radiohead. And I think that this is a good example of where those spaces meet. Sort of the atmospheric background, the sort of probably too long middle section, lots of layered guitars, but that real fierce in your face vocal. And that song was a, without the full homage that I would later write for Jeremy. That was my song to him in a way, because they used to have these big World War I guns in Memorial Park, which is where I grew up in El Paso. And they had these old, with the sort of metal bucket seat. And we used to go and play on those when we were little boys. And so it was just my way of, it was my Easter egg to him, having just lost him.
That's cool. Cool tribute.
Track 2 doesn't waste any time. It just goes.
No wasting time.
It just goes right. I love it. And that is Hiss the Villain. Jim, if I had to describe Porcelain to somebody without using any words, it'd be something like because there's the dual guitar thing, and I don't know who's doing what all the time.
I don't either.
How did you guys come up with some of these interlocking things? And is that Paul doing a lot of that?
Yeah. I'm not a lead player at all, so it's really rare that you'll hear me play more than. And if it sounds like a lead, but it repeats 50 times, that's me. Cause it's just a riff, a 1-note riff, but I'm just not a lead guy at all. Like, I have 4 pedals on my board. Even when I toured with a huge pedal board, cause I thought it made me look cool, I only use 4 of them most of the time. So all the little intricate stuff I think is, and this would almost always be the case for Sparta. Like, I would write something, we would sort of jam it out as a band, or somebody would write a riff and we would jam it out into the parts. And then I would sort of lay down the rhythms, and then I kind of step back and just let all the parts get filled in that other guitar player. I mean, we've had multiple guitar players, so it's sort of whatever parts they want to put in.
It's a great jam. I think, did you have any, I mean, obviously Nub mentioned earlier that Breaking the Broken kind of ended up being the single. Did you have any singles in mind when you were writing this, or were you just kind of going, let's do it jams?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it was just being at the ranch, sort of enjoying being off the road and not. It was kind of the first time we were all away from our families in one, like a destination writing situation. And people would come and go. I mean, my wife came out for a while and left, but it's not, if you've ever seen pictures of that place, it's not a real comfortable situation. And there was a lot of like model rockets being shot off, and a lot of booze being drank, and just sort of other things being consumed and making music all day. We just recorded and lived in one space. So I think a lot of it was just get up, play guitars really loud, eat some lunch, play guitars really loud, whatever.
Shoot off rockets.
Yeah. We ordered some rocket engines off the internet, and we're just insanity.
What could go wrong? Seriously, I mean,
it was in the middle of the desert.
I'll tell you what, track 3, when I first heard the album, I thought, this kind of screams single, and it never was, but it seemed to have that potential. Different vibe than Breaking the Broken, but one of my favorites on the album, which is While Oceana Sleeps. Strong bass line from Matt for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's funny because of the harmonic loop and the fact that I'm in a weird tuning, which was what makes that song. So I call it kitty tuning. I don't know what it's really called, but it's a weird tuning. It's an open tuning that kind of always gets the attention. And I was just realizing when you play that, like, it's all about the bass. So when I tried to play it for a acoustic string the other day, and I called Matt and was like, I can't, this song doesn't exist.
I need you, man.
Yeah. So, well, it should have been a single for sure, but you know, labels usually go for the punch in the gut instead of the deeper one, you know, unfortunately.
Definitely the most memorable for me. I think, it's a great track 3. You know, I think
it's also the song that people are super attached to from that record. That's the one that I get #1 most requested song from Porcelain easily.
Is it? Yeah. How, you said that you weren't as involved with set lists. How involved were you in the sequencing of the sort of track order on this? Because I think it's really well put together. There's a lot of tracks. I mean, 14 tracks.
Yeah. I'm not very involved at all. So I kind of, Tony loves to go to mixing and mastering and sequencing. And that's, I already get a lot of attention on this stuff. Like, I'm a primary songwriter and I'm the singer and I do most of the interviews, and I don't need to do all of it. So I feel like when someone says, hey, I really want to do this, then you should sort of step back and let them do it. So honestly, like I wouldn't take any credit at all for any of that. Mixing, mastering, sequencing, none of it.
Gotcha.
Jim, and track 4, you can confirm, deny, or no comment, but I think it's about your hometown. That's just my guess. And that is Sleepercar.
100%.
Previously mentioned too, I hear those synthesizer notes. It's a layer, but it's in there. And I like the thickness that gives. But so indeed, this is the El Paso tribute.
Yeah, the circle means fence. So it's just talking about the fence between our city is broken up with an international border. But really, El Paso and Juarez are so interconnected, both by families and commerce and the air we breathe and the air we pollute and the water that we share, the river that we share. So yeah, it's just a reference to the hometown. And then I always start like in a nonfiction setting. A lot of times I'll pick something that's, even if it's a love song, I'll take something that's happened in my life with Christine and then I'll sort of build from that. But it's not always truthful or accurate. It's kind of like I have that poetic license and I use it heavily. So,
have you ever jammed with Beto O'Rourke?
No, I've never played music with him. No, okay. But he's a good friend of mine.
Is he? Okay. I know that he plays, right? I mean,
he does. Yeah. So I was wondering if he was any good, but Well, he was in a band called Foss that I absolutely loved.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was in a band called Foss. Actually, Cedric was the drummer in Foss.
Oh, really?
They came off their US, like their summer tour that you do when you're 17 or 18. And I grabbed Cedric right after that tour. That's the beginning of At the Drive-In, was the end of the bands that he was in at that time.
It's kind of funny, honestly. Like, for those of us that don't know him, just know of his political stylings. It's kind of hilarious to think of him like in a band with like Cedric drumming and,
Oh, and they were so good, man. They were really like from that DC vibe, like the Discord vibe, like, and the sort of ringleader of all that is this guy named Arlo Clark, who's my hero and my older brother in the scene and my mentor. He's like our Ian Mackay. Yeah. So it was a good crew. It was a good crew to grow up in. I'm sort of the youngest end of it. I'm like the tail end of that whole gang.
Right.
We all sort of went to the same high school and they were seniors when I was a freshman. That's my connection to them.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
I'm not a singer, Jim, because I'm a drummer and drummers should never sing. But
debatable.
Except unless you're Phil Collins.
There you go. Also Will Champion. I don't know if you're familiar.
And Will Champion. That's a great call.
Levon Helm, he was pretty good.
Come on.
Yeah. There you go. Exactly. So you guys are proving me wrong. I like
Don't sell yourself short, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. If I were a front man though, this is the type of chorus I would love to sing live, and maybe it would tear the shit out of my throat. So afterwards I'd be like, but this has to feel good to sing. I know it's not an uplifting lyric, but the melody of it and the aggression of it is very real. I think it's just something that it must be a little cathartic to sing. Track 5 was the single, Breaking the Broken. I want to get your take on whether was this a single that you liked, or did you get sick of it after a while, or where does this fit in 2021? But let's do the clip of it first. Breaking the Broken. I love this song, but I know that lead singles can be something that you get burnt out on and things like that over time. What's your relationship?
I love this song. I'll still play it. I still play it all the time. Yeah, it's like one of my go-to because it can go slower and acoustic really well. But that's a good example of a Paul riff that the whole song is built around. That whole beginning riff, that's a Paul riff, and what a catchy thing. What a catchy riff.
It's a great song, man. Really strong.
All right, and track 6, slow things down a little bit, but Lines in Sand. Maestro, good job on the clip. That to me is the magic of the song when it just bursts like that.
So that was our first time ever having string players in the studio. And what a crazy experience to hear your music played by what I consider real musicians. Like it's so unreal. It was like, we were just all sitting on the floor of the studio, like probably crying because it was like, how can something we made sound this fucking beautiful? And it's unreal. But all of that's based around a Matt Miller bass line that is, brilliant song.
Well, I'll tell you, part of the reason they can make it sound beautiful is because they had a pretty beautiful thing to work with.
It's just, it's,
in the first place.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
And then En Moraine actually closes off the second side of the first vinyl for looking at the sequencing there. So this picks up the tempo back up a little bit. Pretty simple here, Jim. Just this sounds like more of kind of guys in the garage sort of vibe on this particular song.
So that I remember very well, Paul sort of making that song and Paul and Tony working on it and sort of building this song and then looking at me to sing on it. And I was like, what the fuck do you sing on this? Like, I have no idea. And I feel like that song is the hardest I've ever worked on putting down a vocal to a song. Like, to me, it was so complicated to find the cadence in it, and to make it mine, to sing my style on it or whatever. Like, I love how it turned out, but that's a good example of like just putting in the work. Like that was a grind for sure.
Coming up with, where would you rank as a composer, coming up with the right vocal line, and where it all clicks and you're like, okay, we got it. I dabble in a little songwriting. I mean, I think that's a huge challenge, where would you rank that as far as the challenge of composition?
If it was a car analogy, I would say it's the wheels. Like it ain't going to go anywhere if you don't finish a good vocal. Like that's it. You know what I mean? A car can roll down the hill without an engine, but it's not going anywhere without wheels.
Indeed.
Speaking of car, it's funny you say that because to me, the driving song on the album is Death in the Family, this slow beginning, and then it just takes off. I love this song. Death in the Family, track 8. All based around that opening riff, Jim, or how did this one develop with those different sections?
All based around that. So it's a C sharp tuning. So I started dabbling with sort of different tunings, which is While Oceana Sleeps, and then different string gauges, just trying to find, not repeat the same song. That's all like a C sharp guitar, and always thought that song did not get the attention that it deserved. Like always thought that was such a fucking good song. And
I agree.
Always proud of that one, but it just didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't catch on with everybody, I guess. I don't know. It's
like a lot of the album. It didn't fit in a box. But that's what we love about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It might be the reason why it didn't explode, but it is why we still love this record, Well,
hopefully that will give it longevity and not, like I said, I'm into the quality over the quantity.
Absolutely. So Syncope is sort of an instrumental kind of, even though I really do dig it and I love the way it sets up tensioning, but into what I think is just one of the more emotional aspects of the album, and certainly one of my favorites, and that is tensioning. Just so sonically rich, and when that back and forth vocal thing comes in at the end. I love the way it all builds.
It's funny that I never thought about it until right this second, but I am literally asking for help in that song right there. And I had never thought about it. I seriously, but after telling you the story, what happened by the end of this tour, that is 100% me writing down to somebody like, will you please help me?
Wow.
I am fucking falling apart. Yeah. Wow. That's fucked up to think about now.
It's a powerful song.
I have a therapist now, so this will be easy to get through.
Well, I'll certainly listen to it a bit differently from now on, but it's a hell of a song.
Yeah, that's heavy.
Yeah, I really like the way it kind of brings you down the home stretch here. Hell of a song.
It's funny too, and thinking back, I got into, you get into these things you do when you play live, and on the chorus, there's a part, there's like a punch, and I started doing this thing where I would hit myself in the side of the head. And as the tour went on, I started doing it harder and harder, and then started, like not really, like it's just part of the show, I think. And it's like, that's the punch of the song or whatever. But I started kind of hurting myself in the process and having to sort of back off. But I think that it is just like a really guttural, emotional song for me.
Yeah, it is.
It is for sure. It was for us as listeners as well. It's an amazing track. Travel by Bloodline comes next. Jim, a song that takes full advantage of the ka 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 ka.
Yeah.
It's just every time I hear it, it's just like, oh, did they really embrace the ka 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 ka?
Yeah, it's such a fun thing to do live too, and that was a song for my grandfather, and I loved playing it because he was when he died, we had just left for what was like the Glassjaw tour that we did on Wiretap, which is a huge, like one of the biggest tours I've ever done in a co-headlining situation, and the second show was in El Paso. It's the only time my grandfather ever was on my bus. And he came on the bus, and he was about to have surgery because they had found some tumors in his head. And he got on the bus and he said, man, this is just like being in the Navy. And I just thought, like, how cool is that?
That's awesome.
Yeah, such a good memory. Yeah. Good dude.
That is. And I do remember you playing this one live. You seem to like this one.
Yeah. Oh, it's a burner.
Absolutely, it sure is. So POME is the before mentioned drum solo by Tony, or POME. I'm sorry. And is that Paris of the Middle East? Is this?
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. So he was born in Beirut.
Nice.
Which they call the Paris of the Middle East. So it seemed appropriate to name. Yeah.
That's nice. Cool. I like that. So we'll skip that in terms of the clip, but the kind of epic. And I want to know how come this didn't close the album, just because of the way it moves and shakes and ends. But it's a second to last track, and that is From Now to Never. I love this song. I'm the prog guy in the podcast, so I just love the twists and turns. Was there a thought to conclude the album like this in that sort of dramatic way?
I don't think there was any preconceived notion to where that song would end up, but I definitely know I wanted to make something epic. Just trying to get, it's intentional that the lyrics are repeated in French by a woman. Like, all that stuff is meant to be cinematic and emotional, and some people really boring. But for me, I live in that sort of in the pendulum swing, which is why I said, like, you don't get to tell me what I do is wrong. You can not like it. But for me at the time, I wanted to make just a fucking long, slow burning, I remember showing that song to Josh Homme in the middle of making the record. And he goes, "Oh, you really play piano." And I was like, it was like the best compliment, because I don't think he liked the song, but he was like, "Oh man, oh, you really play piano."
That's cool.
That's the best.
And the conclusion of Porcelain, just kind of a jammer to end it, and that is Splinters. Yeah, you chose the right clip again, Maestro. I love that. The balance is broken line. That's full on Jim Ward.
Also, just the scream, like, yeah, don't ever let them know you can scream, because then it's like being the designated hitter. It's just like, we need something big right here. Okay, scream. All right. You can't really, which is why I think at some point you make a record like Quiet, which was just all acoustic and so soft, because I had been screaming for so long, Yeah, that's again a good example of a Pauly Nohos riff, just a shredder. Man, that guy's a shredder. So.
Sure is. Jim, we cannot thank you enough for your time, and we know you have a lot of obligations, and we're just so thrilled and honored that you would spend some time with us. Any final reflections on Porcelain as an album that you can share with us?
It's actually been really nice to go back and listen to this stuff. Like some of this, if it's not on my current set list, I don't go back and revisit it as much as probably I should. And thank you for giving me that opportunity. It really actually has been super enjoyable. And I love this format. You guys are doing something cool, and I will definitely check out other episodes for sure. Thanks so much for having me.
That'd be incredible. And we always end the show with we do a rating system of the album where we do on the turntable, in the collection, collecting dust, or for sale bin. Porcelain's going on the turntable.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, let's just, we both know that. So
thank you,
Jim Ward. Thank you so much for your time and your perspective. And thanks above all for the music. And hopefully we see you sometime soon here in Michigan on tour. Yeah. I know we will both be there, and we'll be the two guys in the back just losing our minds. All right.
I look forward to it. I'll see you guys then.
Thanks for joining us, Jim.
Awesome, man. Thanks, guys.
Well, that was pretty cool, huh, T?
Awesome. I mean, cool of him to join. Loved hearing, how in depth he got on his history within music as a whole, the history of his really two bands that he's most known for. That was a real treat. Absolutely.
Well, T, let's bring episode 46 to a close the way we do, and that is by figuring out what is in your head. Let's do it.
Two times.
T, three songs that are ringing in your head right now. Go ahead.
All right. The first is one of my favorites from Jamiroquai. This is called King for a Day, which was the closer of the album Synchronized. And I think it was their. I don't know whether to say his or their. JK kind of is the thing. But, it's their last good album, I think. Really good album. And King for a Day is an awesome closer, particularly the end of the song with the strings. And it's always a go-to. I try not to go too long without that one. Second is, you have these bands that everybody knows the band and everybody knows the song that they're famous for, but few people know sort of the secondary hit. And this is one of those secondary hits that I love saying, that's great that you love Cult of Personality, but have you ever heard Open Letter to a Landlord by Living Colour? And,
I love that one. Love that
one. And, many people are like, yeah, I know it. Many people are like, no, I don't. And then you play it for them and it's like, wow, these guys were a legit good band, right? So Open Letter to a Landlord, fantastic. The third, since it's starting to get a little sunshiny and a little warm out there, Nub, even up here in the old mitten, you start to get into some of these summer jams, and a good summer jam for me, particularly when I'm, rolling with the homies out there, riding laid back out there, as I like to do, is You Haven't Done Nothing by the great Stevie Wonder, who is always truly a wonder. What do you got, Nub?
It's excellent choices, T. I've got a song from the Sensefield album, Living Outside, an album I know you're very fond of. I think it was one of your albums of the year, and that is
Indeed.
Feel What You Feel. Dug that one this week, and I really enjoyed that one. Next would be the song Tomorrow by the band James, who's most known for that one song called Lady.
Man, but you're really hitting all my buttons today. I'm a huge James fan. And
absolutely.
Just new material, I believe, either very recently or forthcoming from those. I think it's forthcoming from those guys. So
excellent. Well, we look forward to that. And third would be In the Heart of the Young, the closing title track of the second album from our good friends Winger.
Wow. Hot in your head by you, Nub. I'll tell you, you went 3 for 3 on that one, in my opinion, buddy. Well
coming in hot. Episode 46 was a memorable one. We want to thank Jim Ward so much for joining us. We want everyone to, of course, to check out the featured album, Sparta Porcelain, but the new album, Trust the River, is well worth picking up. And of course, the new Jim Ward solo album will be coming out in June. And we really want everyone to check out the lead single Paperfish, which is just a fantastic song. And man, it was so cool just to talk to Jim about all things Sparta, but all things, the other bands he's been in and some of the other projects. So thank you once again, Jim Ward. And that puts a bow on episode 46. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure and check us out on all streaming platforms and leave us feedback and make a request and all the other things that we love so much about the listeners of our humble little podcast here. So we ask for all of you to take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And we will see you for episode 47 of Two Twins and an Album.
Two twins and an album.
Well, that's about it. That's all we have. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. We will see you on tour. Until then, take it easy.